All right, I think we have plenty of folks to chat with, so we will get started on our NCARB Live today. Welcome to all of you. So glad to have you joining us. I know, we're targeting this towards a student audience in particular, and I know it might be the end of summer or the beginning of the school year, so it's really exciting that so many of you are able to join us live. For today's NCARB Live webinar. Welcome. I'm Jeremy Fritz, the Assistant Vice President for Policy and International Relations at NCARB. And today I'm joined by Emily Anderson, our Outreach Manager in the same department, and also Nilou Vakil, a practicing architect and Associate Professor at the University of Kansas. And so I'll let them say hi a little bit in a moment. Today, we're going to share with you tips and resources to help you make the most of your education and get your journey to licensure started. So really excited about this topic and excited to offer you our thoughts, but also to answer any questions you have. We'll start out with some of the basics you need to know about how to become an architect in the United States. And then our panelists will share some tips to help maximize what you're getting from your education. And then we'll close out with about a half an hour's worth of time to answer Q&A that you can submit. You can always add those into the Q&A box as we go, and we'll get back to those in a little while. But before we get started into any presentation, Emily and Nilou, why don't each of you tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you're up to currently? And we can start with Nilou.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nilou Vakil. I am an associate professor of architecture at the University of Kansas, and I'm also a practicing architect. So that combination of just knowing what the trends and what the challenges are in the profession and being connected to academia, which most of you are in the audience. So I teach a professional practice class here, which you probably either already have taken or you will be taking in your educational path. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And please, if you have any questions, reach out to NCARB and they can pass on any questions to me in regards to the connection of both.
All right, Emily?
Thanks. My name is Emily Anderson. I am licensed to practice architecture in Florida, and that's where I live and work remotely for NCARB from. And I had a little bit of a not straightforward path to get to my license. And so once I got there, I was all about helping other people get there too. And so now I have the opportunity to work at NCARB and help people all across the country to get to that coveted title of architect.
And again, I am work in the education space, and with Emily, we both get out and travel and talk to students all over the country and talk to faculty over the country. And in fact, Nilou is an alum of our Scholars in Professional Practice program, where we bring in professional practice educators and help them get to know each other and become the best educators they can be. So really excited about connecting with students and helping you succeed in your educational journey. But before that, maybe to begin your educational journey toward licensure, we should probably talk a little bit about what it takes to become licensed as an architect in the United States. And Emily's going to take us through a quick overview of that. So take it away.
Awesome. So this is our topic for today. Some of you may have a lot of familiar with us as NCARB. Some of you might not be sure. Well, I know they have something to do with architecture, and I know they have something to do with me getting my license, but I'm not quite sure what. And so the title of architect is a protected title. Just like I mentioned, it took me a long time to be able to say those words, I'm an architect. And so the rules for who's allowed to say that are a little bit different in each state. And so NCARB, National Council of Architectural Registration Boards, works with the licensing boards across the country to help facilitate the process of licensure. So for most of those jurisdictions, there's going to be some kind of education component, there's going to be some kind of experience component, and there's going to be some kind of examination component. Where NCARB steps in is once you have gotten that education complete, we're going to verify your transcript and add it to your record. We are going to, when you are working on the experience program and working in firms and gaining the experience you need to build competency and learn all of the things you need to know as an architect, those reports are going to come to us. And again, we're going to be a record keeper there. And then when it comes to time for examination, we have a group of volunteers that develops the exam, and we also are vital in the process of administering the exam. And again, adding that to your record so that whatever state you go to and say, hey, I have the qualifications now, can I get an architectural license? That we can be the person who's going to send that out for you. We have all the record keeping already done for you. So the license is there to demonstrate your competence. I know sometimes people look at NCARB and they're like, oh, they're the bad guy, but we really are here to make that process happen. And that we want to make sure that once you get that license, once you're able to say, I'm an architect, that it actually means something. And so the process is there not to give you checkboxes to check off and hoops to jump through, but to make sure that once you can say that you're an architect, that you really can do all the things that you need to do to be an architect. One of the pieces of that process, again, the architectural experience program kind of modeled off of, people for as long as we can remember to become architects have worked with an architect in an apprenticeship type model, learning things on the job. And so for what that process looks like right now, there's 6 categories. They roughly follow the outline of working on an architectural project. You're going to report that to us so we can keep it on your record in hours. But there's 96 tasks, 96 things that you should be building competency, ability, proficiency in, so that, again, when you get to the license, you know all the things you need to know. So for each of those areas in our AXP guideline, there is a page that looks something like this. At the top, it will have a description of what kinds of things you'll be doing in that area. And then below, it'll have a list of tasks that are things that you would be doing in that area that you should be building competency in. That's divided into, so that's the what you're earning experience in. This is the how you're earning it. Most of you will do it by working in an architecture firm with somebody who's licensed to practice architecture here in the US. They can also hold a Canadian license, and you need to get about half of your total time in setting A, but you can absolutely do 100% of your time in setting A, and that is what most people do. There are some setting O opportunities. They're going to have some detailed limits on how you can use those, and so you really want to dive into those in the AXP guidelines. I always like to point out that there are some volunteer and self-directed opportunities in setting O, but in setting A, you absolutely 100% must be paid for those options. It is illegal for an architecture firm to have you working for them and not be compensating you fairly. Please make sure that if someone is trying to offer you an internship where your pay is exposure, run the opposite direction. We're going to talk just a little bit about the exam. As a student, unless you're in an IPAL program and testing while you're in school, that's probably a little bit further out on the horizon, but I want to make sure that you're not scared of it. So those same 6 areas that we talked about in AXP, 6 areas on the exam. And then there are some, so items is just how many questions are on the test. You will see that these are long tests. And so as you're preparing a strategy for learning content, you should also be developing a strategy for how to deal with that long of a test. But you do have break time on the test as well to work into that strategy. There are lots of resources available from NCARB, and that's always going to be where I recommend you start for studying for the exam. The ARE guidelines have everything that you need to know about the exam, what the structure of the exam is, what the content is, what reference books the writers used while they were writing exam items. So one of our tips, I think, later is look at this list. And if you see any of those books on the list that you have for school, hold on to them because you might want to keep them around for later. We do have, for each division, there is one practice exam, one set of questions. And we have seen that people who use the practice exams do better on the real test. So make sure you're using them. And if you have your NCARB record active and you are not ARE complete yet, so even if you haven't established eligibility for testing yet, you can still take a look at those. And then make sure you're always, this whole process, everything, don't do it alone. There are other people out there to support and help you make sure you're getting support and guidance from everyone else. And so with that, I think we're going to move on to our tips section. And I think we're going to start with Nilou. Right?
Yeah, well, I will lead into that though, and thank you, Emily, for getting us all to the baseline of what it takes to become an architect in the United States. I asked a couple of our staff colleagues along the way what they thought might be important. And our friend Martin says, stay awake and fully engage in your professional practice class. So I thought that's a good lead in for you, Nilou, someone who teaches professional practice. But what other tips do you have for students on what they ought to be paying attention to and how to maximize their education?
Yeah, that's thank you, Martin, for that advice. I think that's a really good one. Remember that class that you took that you fell asleep in the back and you're like, what does this have to do with the business of design? It has a lot to do with the business of design. I do teach both advanced studios and professional practice and ethics. And I have to say the ethics and the professional practice are really connected. And without those two, you will not be able to navigate, or without having the base knowledge where to look for information, it would be very difficult to navigate the next steps, especially getting licensed. I think becoming a licensed architect, as said, this is an important step because it shows competency in protecting the public's health, safety, and welfare, which is one of our biggest jobs. If you read the Code of Ethics for Architects, that's one of the things that is stressed on more than anything else. So make sure to really pay attention to that class. It's not just about the business of architecture, it's about how you get licensed. And I have to say that licensure is a very important piece of our puzzle in the profession. Other recommendations and tips that I have for you, both from having gone through the process myself and dealing with hundreds of students that go through licensure. I have seen from 9 months out of the school getting licensed to studying for decades and not being able to accomplish that. More than ever, NCARB had made it easy for the participants to actually do this successfully, more than ever. The resources that are available through NCARB, study materials, the test exams, and also one of the recent perks, recent in the past decade, has been that you can actually start taking the exams as you complete your work experience. So you don't have to wait 4, 5, 6 years to complete all the categories before you begin taking the test. So that simultaneous studying, taking the test, and experience the triple E's that we talked about, those align, and you don't have to wait for a long time to do that. So definitely take advantage of the NCARB resources and the new strategies that they want you to become licensed, and they want you to use these resources. It's incredible. You're already on the right track. by being in this seminar. You're already on track by showing curiosity about how to do things. So when you start working and when you start collecting your hours, you have to be your biggest advocate. If there's any category that you think you need more experience in, try to speak up. And that's the piece that most of our interns, when they're gaining experience working in firms, sometimes are not brave enough to speak up and say, hey, I have enough time in, I don't know, project management. Can I see something that relates to design and development, for example? If there is a category that you need assistance with, you need to carve out time to be able to talk to somebody who is your mentor or the licensed architect that you're working under and speak about it. And believe it or not, people actually are always willing to support you. And this is something that we all want our interns to succeed. And quite honestly, it would be a great way to show leadership and show advocacy for yourselves. And in addition to having a licensed architect that you work with, seek a mentor. And a mentor doesn't have to be an architect. A mentor doesn't have to be necessarily licensed. A mentor could be somebody who can help with the path in general of how are you balancing this complex process of becoming a licensed architect with whatever your life situation is. So that's something that I highly recommend, to having a mentor that is typically outside of your firm, to have to be able to speak to some challenges that you might have at work. So always seek for a mentor to be able to help you with that. Another thing that I know NCARB is very great at speaking about the AXP and also the examination processes. So I'll put that aside, but I also want to talk about the documentation of your experience. Carefully document that. If you're working with NCARB and immediately log in your hours, this is something that is, again, available to you to be able to do quickly, and don't leave it to the last minute. To be honest with you, I see people move firms and it's really difficult for them to backtrack to get signatures and to remember what they've done in the past. And there's also I think a 5-year limit on what you have done. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy and Emily. I think this is important for us to know, that there's a limitation of the years of experience that you've had. So as you go, as you gain experience, log them in and be aware of the criteria that and the categories that you need more experience in. Yep. And obviously use the resources, but also stay with the trends of the industry. That is that connection that you have with maybe people other than and members of your firm. Get involved in your local AIA, get involved with AIAS, and get involved with different chapters, professional chapters that are related to what you like to do and what your passion is. There are a lot of ways to make that connection, obviously, but take that initiative to make those connections. Those are some of the tips that I have for setting yourself up for some of these challenges, and know that you're not alone. Again, NCARB is there to help you. The resources are incredible. I will be willing to answer any questions that may come after Jeremy and Emily speak a little bit more to their tips.
Yes, and just a reminder, you can be putting those questions in Q&A in the next 5 to 10 minutes. We'll start answering questions. But Emily, you're out in the world and talk to students all over the place, all kinds of different programs, all kinds of different students. What are your tips?
So my first one is find some sort of architecture related club to get involved with. I've definitely heard the joke about like, oh, clubs in college are just paying dues so you can have friends. And yes, you will get friends out of your college clubs, but for if you're joining AIAS or NOMAS or Architecture Student Council or all the various architecture clubs that are out there, you're going to get so much more out of it than just the social aspect. There's going to be professional development that comes out of it. A lot of those architecture clubs will put together events where you can get AXP credit right from that event. So maybe working on a Freedom by Design project, or working on going on a site visit with a mentor, or taking part in a design competition that's outside of the classroom. Get involved in those things early, and so then you can start building AXP right while you're still in school, even if you haven't had a job or a summer internship yet. And then the other thing, I'm just going to repeat: advocate for yourself, advocate for yourself, advocate for yourself. I know that when you are the newbie at the firm and you feel like you don't have power, you do, and you need to speak up for yourself. That might be things like asking for the particular kind of AXP experience you need for. It might be saying, hey, I have this test coming up and it's really important for my career. I need to not be scheduled on something that has a tight deadline around when I'm going to take my test. And so letting your firm know that that you are invested in your career and that you want to make the most out of it, and that if they invest in you, they will get so much more payback.
Great. I also had polled a couple of our licensing advisors, and one of our licensing advisors said, learn the software. And I know in school, depending on what school you're in, they may be very pro teaching you software or very opposed to teaching you software. And some of your faculty may say, oh, it'll be outdated. You can learn that when you get on the job. But to help you be workplace ready, it is important if you could go in with some software skills in the Adobe Creative Suite, in Revit or AutoCAD. Those are going to be skills that are going to help you land a job and immediately be productive and immediately get some experience. So if your school is teaching that and giving you that experience, that's terrific. Otherwise, I would add to that tip as well, is seek out a place for you to learn and walk in and be at least conversant in the tools that you're going to be using in the workplace. Okay, I want to throw in a couple more of my tips. One was make friends outside of architecture school, because one, they'll be great for your mental health, and maybe they'll even bring you snacks late at night, but they are your future clients. So, if you have friends who are in the business school, that's probably a good thing for your future career, and stay in touch with those folks. I would say learn to write and speak well. Believe it or not, those are skills that we hear through a lot of our research and our discussions with practitioners. They actually really care a lot about your ability to communicate in actual written form, not just texts. But in writing, your ability to speak and have a conversation, your ability to speak and present yourself. So whenever you're presenting your projects and maybe you feel shy or you hate doing that, just think of that as building your skills for your career. And I would say take advantage of we talked about asking questions. Nilou, you talked about asking questions, and taking advantage of the people who are around you. I would say it's really hard to do that sometimes in school. You're afraid to talk to an upperclassman. You're afraid to show that you don't understand something. You're afraid to talk to a professor. And in fact, those people are ready and almost always eager to help you. So don't be afraid to talk about what you don't understand, what you don't know how to do. And I think you'll be richly rewarded by people who will help you along that journey. So that's probably the most important tip that I would say. And then maybe also in line with that is if you're struggling with, shifting to the kind of workload that's expected in your school, or the kind of brain stretching activities. And I mean that very literally. stretching your brain and teaching it. You're literally growing hemisphere, some of the neuron connections in your brain while you're in school, and especially as you're learning the kinds of thinking that's required in architecture school. Sometimes that's hard. So don't be afraid to reach out for, to counselors who are in school, to friends, and to just talk about the fact that it's hard learning some of these new skills and waiting for your brain to catch up to what you're expected to do in class. Because that's very much what's happening from a scientific brain science perspective. Two more from me, and then one is make sure you've seen a set of construction documents. I don't think I looked at an actual set of construction documents for a building until the first internship I had, and hadn't even seen them. And that is, in fact, those instruments of service that you're going to be creating if you're going to practice architecture. You're going to be creating documents of some kind, or that explain to someone else, a constructor, a builder, contractor, what it is that is to be constructed. And so look at those construction drawings and get familiar with how they're put together. Then my most controversial one, which I will ask Emily and Nilou to weigh in on as I start to look for our questions. The most controversial one, I think, is you don't have to get an A in studio. We have a lot of energy in the United States in most schools. There's so much energy and time put into studio. And there are your other classes, your professional practice class is important. Making those friends who will be future work colleagues and future clients is important. So my thought is don't feel the need to always be the overachiever in design studio. But I'll let Nilou and Emily push back on that if you like. Any more thoughts from you all?
Well, I think studios are important, but building skills that apply to many things, I think it's more important. So I know there's so much focus on studio teaching in our architectural education, which really limits our ability to learn other things. I echo what Jeremy's saying, because one of the strengths of a rounded human being is being able to actually get the next job. And if you, and in architecture, we are in a business of architecture, and business eventually needs to be sustaining itself, and you need to make money. And when I ask my students, I have a class of almost 100 students every other semester that we work on all these questions that we're talking about here. And when I ask my students who wants to have their own firm, and these are fourth-year students, Master of Architecture students, almost 80% of students raise their hands. And if you want to have your own business, you need to be able to get the project and be able to deliver on the project in a confident and competent way. So all these tips are for that. And I agree that although it's very important to become a great designer, and design skills are just beyond designing a building, it teaches problem solving at every level. But what's important is being able to make those human connections. But at the end of the day, those human connections are the skills and are the ways to sustain a business and being able to connect with the clients and their needs. Eventually, we have to respond to the needs of a client, whatever that is. I'm not only not going to push back, I'm going to advocate for what you're saying, Jeremy, because I think it's important to be able to be a very well-rounded person, because studios, it's a never-ending problem solving. So at some point we have to end it because we have the constraints of time and constraints of a semester and a term or a project. But our human skills can always be developed more and more. So I'm for that.
I'll push back a little, but not in probably the way you're expecting. I think the real issue to look at is not getting trapped in perfection paralysis, because I can look back at my own school experience and I can look at my studio classes that I took in undergrad, and I, would obsess over every tiny decision. And it's designed so everything needs to have a reason behind every single tiny little thing. And so I would, does the wall need to be 6 inches this way or 6 inches that way? And so then I would end up in a space where I was never done and I was never satisfied, versus once I was in grad school, I was also working a full-time job. I had kids, I had a family, I had other responsibilities, and I did not have time for that perfection paralysis. And so making a decision and moving on and being okay with it not being the right decision, and also being okay with, okay, if I have to change it later because it wasn't the right decision, I can do that. I don't have to get it perfect the first time. And so like still striving for an A, but not necessarily like, oh my gosh, every little thing has to be perfect. And if they ask me in my review, why did you do this? And I don't have a substantial reason behind it, that's okay. Like, it's okay to say, well, I was focusing on this part, so that's where my energy went to, instead of, oh no, I totally missed this other thing.
All right. Thank you both. I did mention that we have research that shows that that your future employers care about your reading and speaking skills and other things, writing and speaking skills as well as other things. And we're going to actually publish some of that research in the next 2 weeks. So you'll be looking for our workforce readiness report, and it's research that we did to figure out, what are employers in the architecture world hoping to find in a new graduate. Someone coming into their firm. So look for that from NCARB in the next 2 weeks. And our first question is, we'll go to Emily. Once you're licensed in one state, can you practice in all U.S. states?